Thank you very much, Victor. Next, I'd like to invite Australia to come forward. Greg Brown and Justin McDonald, Cattle Council of Australia.
Thanks very much, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, in Australia, we believe that a good presenter has to possess two key characteristics. The first being you must have extensive knowledge of your subject matter, lots of intelligence and relevant experience. The second is to maintain people's interest and attention, one needs to possess good looks. Given we couldn't find someone in Australia who possessed both characteristics, we've decided that it takes two of us to present this presentation. I'm going to leave it up to you to decide which of us holds which characteristics. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Justin McDonald, and I'm a grass-fed beef producer from central Queensland in Australia. I have been elected by fellow beef producers in my area to represent their views on the Cattle Council of Australia. Cattle Council of Australia is probably very similar to, I think it's the NCBA here in America. I'm very keen to get an idea in the audience here of how many other beef producers there are from around the world in the room. So could I ask people who are actually involved in producing cattle if they could raise their hands? So, oh, that's excellent. We've got a good, a reasonable representation. Today I'm going to give you a very quick overview of the Australian beef industry's beef production systems and the state of the state that we find our industry currently in. I'd also then like to outline some of the key areas that we as producers, and in Australia we use the term producers. I think in America you might use the term ranchers. So producers and ranchers see for driving improvements in our sustainability. And then I shall pass over to the President of the Cattle Council of Australia, Greg Brown, to talk about the future challenges. So the state of the Australian beef industry. Like all Australian cattle producers, I am very proud to be a cattle producer. Our industry contributes approximately $16 billion to the Australian economy each year, which is approximately about 22% of the total value of agriculture produced in Australia, and employs over 170,000 people. We recognise that we play an important role in ensuring sustainability through our contribution to the economy, the community, and of course to the environment. As cattle producers in Australia and caretakers for over 47% of Australia's land area, no body or organisation like Cattle Council really understands that we manage land better than ourselves. The land is our livelihood. We need to look after it to have a sustainable business for now and also in the future, and for future generations. Many of you will be aware that in Australia we've recently been through a period of prolonged drought. And the interesting thing is, despite this drought, which in some areas has gone for in excess of 10 years, we've been able to maintain a relatively stable cattle herd. And at current estimates have our herd sitting at about 27 million head. This is forecast, you'll see, I think it's probably showing up as pink. This forecast to slightly increase over the next 5 years to about 30 million head. But from my point of view, and probably from Cattle Council's point of view, we don't necessarily believe that we need to increase our cattle numbers to increase our production. From my experience, we should be focusing on increasing productivity, producing more beef from our existing numbers, which is also better for the environment. And that's exactly what our industry has been trying to achieve, more from less in order to be sustainable. So this just gives you a good idea of the distribution of cattle production across Australia. Approximately 80% of our cattle herd are located in the eastern states of Australia. The industry currently extends over almost across the whole of Australia and across all of its landmass and climatic zones. And the beef production in Australia is Australia's most extensive industry. This means that environmentally it has a closer association with more of Australia's land resources than any other agricultural industry. And in my view, therefore, you can't possibly have an environmental initiative in Australia without engaging with Australian beef producers. We cover 47% of the land area and manage the natural resources on that area. You can see from the map there where our prospective properties are. They probably makes them look pretty big, but they're really not that big. Greg's up in the north and I'm more in central Queensland. In economic and social terms, the beef industry relates to more rural and regional communities, including Indigenous Australians, than any other industry in Australia. With the vast area of arid and semi-arid rangelands in Australia, Australia has a natural advantage in producing grass-fed beef. All cattle in Australia are initially raised on pasture, with approximately a third of those being moved into feedlots for an average of about 100 days prior to slaughtering, depending on the market destination where they're heading. Our business in Australia, we export 65% of our production a year to over 110 different countries around the world. So we're very export focused. As major suppliers of beef to a growing global population, we believe we play an essential role in sustainably producing safe and healthy beef to help ensure food security for future generations. So what are some of the key opportunities that we see to drive improvements in sustainability in Australia? You might also notice, ladies and gentlemen, I haven't used lots of graphs and statistics in our presentation. I find it much simpler to talk to photos, and most of the photos that you see in this presentation are from either Greg's property or my own. So we find it quite easy to talk about them. So in terms of grazing management goes to the core as producers as to what we do. Better grazing management can lead to better ground cover, therefore better productivity and better environmental outcomes. It's truly a win-win situation. Australian graziers also see grazing management as playing a critical role in carbon sequestration and managing on-farm carbon emissions. A recent study conducted in Queensland showed that the Queensland beef industry concluded that the Queensland beef industry, if you're taking full accounting of vegetation stocks, the beef industry is almost carbon neutral. And this is a significant achievement for the Australian beef industry, as almost half the cattle in Australia reside in Queensland. Secondly, infrastructure improvements. Those couple of photos there show some of the improvements we're putting in on our own farm at home. In the last couple of years, we've rolled out or laid about 35 kilometres of polythene pipe. And basically we're putting that in to enable us to move cattle around, to move the cattle around and have better control over our grazing lands. The important thing to note is with this infrastructure is paid for by producers and leads to environmental outcomes. So I think Australian producers, and I suspect producers all around the world, have demonstrated over the years an ability to make their own investments from their own capital that lead to outcomes not only for themselves but also for the environment. Increased research and development. Through research and development, the Australian beef industry has been able to increase its production by over 25% since 1990, yet over the same period we've been able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions per kilo of beef produced by 6.5%. How do we do that? We do that through improvements in herd management, feed quality and productivity measures, including selectively breeding animals that produce more meat and that reach maturity earlier. We as an industry, together with governments, need to continue to invest in research and development to further reduce emissions and manage carbon stores in vegetation and soils while simultaneously increasing productivity. And now, interestingly, when I put these photos together for this presentation, I purposely picked this photo that shows a dairy cow in Europe where they're doing some testing on methane. And given the vastness and the difference in production systems around the world, it's very important that you actually look at the factors that take place in those markets. It's really, in my view, given where I live, I can't really accept someone coming to me and espousing figures that are based on research that are done on dairy cows in Europe, because the emissions that those animals produce will be vastly different from the emissions that come from my animals in a grazing environment in central Queensland. So the important thing is that we have research done into particular production systems by region. Remaining challenges. I'd now like to pass over to the second part of the team, the President of the Cattle Council Australia, Greg Brown, to talk about future challenges for our industry.